just this is going to be very short. It's the end at the end of this chapter on business ethics. So it's a paragraph which says, business with integrity and setting aside fixed times for Torah study. Based on the above, it is possible to explain the juxtaposition of the question regarding conducting business with integrity with the question of setting aside fixed times for Torah study. First two questions asked of a person after he leaves this world will be elaborated in a later chapter. Okay. One of the questions is, did he make Torah study a permanent fixture at an appointed time each day, such that it will become a central pillar of his day? Prioritization of Torah study, if only for an hour or two, is the most salient manifestation of a person's belief that his entire livelihood comes from the creative world, and his responsibility is only to make a meaningful effort and not more. Should a business opportunity arise demanding the cancellation of his fixed time for learning, one should maintain his regular learning schedule in firm faith that he will suffer no loss and that the Creator will provide him with what he deserves. If so, the two questions: did you conduct business with integrity, and did you set aside times for studying Torah, or inexorably bound by the faith that the ultimate power of Hashem is in Hashem's hands? With genuine belief that this is reality, every person can set aside times for Torah study, making them the most important part of his or her day. So I think as long as it's every day, like sometimes you can't have it exactly like us. It can't be exactly the same time. So I think every day, I think, is accepted. I mean, that's, what do you say, Dave? If it's every day or as close to that as possible.
Kev, you would know more than me.
No, you are Talmud Chochem, yeah, and Rosh
Hashanah. That's sweet.
No, what do you think? I mean, it's, as I said, it's not always possible to have it at exactly 7 p.m. SA time every then.
No, well, you know what? You know what? The thing of it is, I think I've thought about this, and although you've got to look at the concepts behind the ideas, and the concept is, if you don't make your learning a fixed practice, it means you will come to drop it. But 500
practice, yes,
testify to the fact that we've stuck at it only because of our flexibility. The fact of it is, Arthur's changed careers. Gavin is also doing training, and now he's not as available earlier on. You, please God, are picking up more clients. Please God, so am I. And we've always been so courteous of each other, of each other's schedules, that's what actually has made it successful, is the fact that we all realize that we're an essential part of this team. So in our case, we've adhered to the spirit of a fixed practice without a fixed time. I think people often get bogged down in the minutiae of detail instead of understanding the concept behind it. You know, maybe if you do a bracha with 2 elbow swaps, it's better than 1 elbow swap. I mean, people sometimes get so involved with the technicality that they forget to look at the reasons behind things. I don't know if you agree with me, Kevin. And sometimes people say, no, you must do this with a shinoi, and you must turn your head exactly like this and do. And these are the most unbalanced people you've ever met, because they're not even mentally well.
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
As you've experienced,
I've met OCD people and people that suffer from mental illness that take on this obsessive compulsive behavior with Judaism. But if it wasn't for Judaism, it would manifest in a myriad of other areas. So you've got to look at the mental health of the individual, the understanding of the greater context of why that principle is applied. You know, anyway, I think it's a good point. So now, guys, we're learning something a little bit different. What we're actually discussing now is a case. It's the fifth and final category of payment delineated in the Mishnah. And what is that? Humiliation. So the Mishnah states, if you remember, it is all according to the status of the humiliator and the humiliated. So what does this mean? It's going to be quite an interesting conversation.
Can I ask a question when you finished your preamble, your intro? Okay, so let's say that now the question I thought of yesterday, I was going to ask, but then we ran out of time. This humiliation, even if it's for a temporary time period, let's say somebody gets an injury and they walk with a limp, but eventually they heal. And when they heal, they're not humiliated anymore. Does that come into play? Does this humiliation, payment for humiliation, depend on a permanent condition, or can it be for a temporary time period?
I think it's an excellent question. It was a question I thought about. Does the humiliation of being crippled or an invalid, is it to do with the permanence, or is it the fact that if it's temporary, is it still counted as humiliation? Now, firstly, I've often said to you, there's certain words in English that epitomize societal views. One of those things is invalid. People that are crippled, they use the word invalid, which means that person doesn't count, for the word invalid because they can't move properly. And that is a shocking explanation. Another one is minute steak. I thought it was called minute steak. And my dad said it's called minute steak because it takes a minute to cook because it's so small. But I'm saying on a serious note, Kevin, you got good merit. But what you've got to bear in mind is sometimes a hurtful incident can last for a lifetime, even though it takes a second. If there was a Reddit thing. Not Reddit is there's people writing of stories that have happened to them or they've got them on YouTube, where a guy was making a speech and suddenly pulled his pants down. And he wasn't obviously that well endowed, he was average or whatever. But as a teenage boy, that absolutely humiliated him. After that, he became a recluse. And it actually damaged his psyche for years. One person thinking it was funny took an incident that maybe took 10 seconds before he quickly pulled his pants up, damaged him for years. So it's not necessarily the amount of time that you suffer humiliation, it's the intensity of the humiliation and the situation involved. And if we look at the perfect pasuk that describes it, it's when two men are fighting, and a woman of the other husband to whom grabs the other gentleman's private parts in order to hurt him and embarrass him. And even if her intent is only to hurt him, the embarrassment from that means that her hand should technically be cut off. They only make a monetary payment because we don't do a hand loss as a punishment, but that is not permanent in nature. But it's highly embarrassing. But the very fact that the Chumash used a temporary example in nature is proof that even a temporary fleeting embarrassment is enough to leave an indelible impression. Not just the fingernails that she left within his private parts, which was agony, but also the humiliation of him being brought to his knees in an instant by her claws, her talons, her fingernails. So now this thing with the humiliator and humiliated, what does that mean? Well, if we look at the damage with an ox, okay, we had a case where an ox was moored, and we have that kofar payment. Okay, so this is a person whose ox had an habitual nature of being dangerous, didn't look after it, and killed a person. In Shemaim, they want to hold him responsible for being absolutely negligent. He knew his animal was dangerous. So there are opinions, rabbinical opinions, that say it's based on the owner of the ox, because he should lose his life, get the death penalty. The only reason he doesn't is it's grama, indirect. But in terms of his negligence, he caused the death. And therefore, he might not get the death penalty on earth, but in heaven he should. He should be held there accountable. Or he could get a divinely sent death penalty through a myriad of accidents. I mean, heaven has a way of working things out. And what happens is he has to pay the value of his life as a damager, as a ransom for his life, because you cannot pay a ransom for your life for direct murder. He said, for he shall give of his life and he shall not pay a ransom. But for murder in which he was negligent but wasn't direct, he does pay a ransom enough to financially cripple them, because we say a poor person is like a dead person in terms of their value. And therefore, if it financially cripples him, it goes a long way towards his kapora. Is that a full kapora? Not necessarily. If he has no guilt, or he doesn't feel bad, or there's no recrimination for his activity, Shemayim will hold him responsible. But if with the right to Shuvah, he has a lifetime of guilt, and he pays a massive sum to the injured family based on him and what his life is worth as the damager. In other words, what is his value? Because by all intents and purposes, he should die. That's the value of the aggressor. There are other rabbinical opinions that say, with regards to the kofir damages, based on what that breadwinner was worth. In other words, the person that was injured, he sustained his family with his job. Now they're penniless because he doesn't have his life anymore. So the assailant should pay, or the owner, not the assailant, the owner of the damaging ox, where he was forewarned that his animal was dangerous, should pay what the life of the victim was worth in order to look after his family for the rest of their lives. So that's what you call, is the value on the kofir on the damaged or the damager. So to here we say, with the, is it based on the humiliated or the humiliator? So it's a similar sort of concept which we'll go through. I hope I've explained it adequately. And by the way, just to answer Arthur's quick question, which was very good. I see the cat's tail, marvelous. Is that basically the fact that it mentions the deaf person last means it's the most extreme out of all the injuries. Otherwise, it would have mentioned a blind person last. Just so that you know. But Arthur's question was the fact that if he keeps losing his functionality, by the time it comes to deafness, he's certainly not worth anything, the victim. And I would agree with Arthur. But the fact of it is, it mentions before with Rashi and the Rashba that being deaf, if you're a manual laborer, is equivalent to being financially dead, because you can't follow instructions. Why you can't write an instruction and say, go to the kitchen and clean the dishes, I don't know. Or why don't you do lip reading and say, go to the kitchen and clean the dish? I don't get it. Maybe. The only thing I could think of is...
Gregory, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Gregory, so he does property and he functions very well off WhatsApp. He's done very well. He's done quite financially. He's done as well as any of the other agents, in his bracket. In fact, I think he's actually excelled. He's been one of the better guys. So, and he operates off WhatsApp, purely. It's phenomenal for him.
But there's 2 reasons, Gavin. There's 2 reasons. Because I've known his sister for years, and I grew up with it. Is the first thing is he had the technology of hearing aids and auditory assistance. And number 2, he grew up in a family where literacy was a value. Many poor people are not literate. Therefore, if you cannot read instructions or can't communicate in a written manner, and you don't have auditory aid, it's a problem.
Yeah, there you are correct.
James, I think you hit the nail on the head there, actually. Why a deaf person is no good. Because in those days, they weren't educated to read and all that stuff.
Correct. But I do
you can't write down all that stuff.
I do think, Arthur...
No, but my point was... Sorry,
Gab, I'll be with you 1 sec. I do think Arthur's point was that it does emphasize that if you affect a person's ability to earn by chopping off their feet, then, as Arthur said, the hand, and then the sight, and then the ear, by the time it comes to the ear, it's a cumulative damage that you've eliminated every way the person can earn a living. So I think that's an excellent insight of Arthur's. Excellent. The fact of it is, on a separate basis, before it did mention that being deaf is like being financially dead. But I think Arthur's point in terms of the way the Gemara emphasizes it is perfect. Arthur, that was well done. Gavin, what were you going to say before we go to...
Sorry, no, I didn't think you... The point I made, you obviously understood, but the emphasis was really... the reason why I made the point is to show... is not to try to compare it to the old days. It was to show how we've improved over the years, and that a guy who used to be considered like dead, nowadays can actually function and operate. That's actually what I was trying to show.
I think it's a brilliant point, and I think it gives us a lot.
So today, is being deaf worse than being blind in today's world?
I don't believe so. I honestly don't believe so.
You've got TV, you've got all these millions of programs. There's subtitles today on every single movie you want to watch. Anyway,
I honestly agree with you, and especially in the age of social media and in the age where everything is done by computer, reading and the ability to use a computer is the way that many people make a living because it's replaced manual labor. So I think today the deficit would be being blind.
correct.
I really, really agree with Gavin there. All right, so guys, let's make a little bit of progress. I think all the points make a lot of sense. So the Gemara says, well, who is the authorship of our Mishnah? In other words, who's the ton of our Mishnah? And it says not Rabbi Meir nor Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, it is Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so why is it not Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Shimon? Because it was taught in a brisa. And regarding all of them, rich and poor people alike, we view them as though they are aristocrats who lost their wealth, or they are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says the eminent person is paid according to his eminence, and the lowly person is paid according to their lowliness. Okay. So what you remember from the Mishnah, I don't know if you do remember the Mishnah, but the Mishnah basically states, and I want to see if I can quickly bring it up. It is my fault. I should have had it up, but hopefully I can see if I can quickly bring it up. Just give me 1 second, guys. Yes. I have brought it up. All right. Yeah. All right. Let me just share my screen. 83.1. Give me a sec. Apologies, guys. All right. Now, let me just. Okay, it is all according to the humiliated and humiliated. So it doesn't seem to, in this Mishnah, give a little bit more detail. But let me just give you an idea of what the Mishnah actually said. This is going to help you. It's basically turning around and saying that, look, at the end of the day, the Mishnah has got a much more conservative view, if you remember. And what was that view? The view was, look, if you're wealthy, and you've got a position of political prominence, any humiliation that you suffer is going to be much more costly and detrimental to your career. If you're washing windows on the side of the road to collect money, if somebody says, go get a job, you bum, then the guy, he's not happy, he's a little embarrassed, but it's not going to cost him on a bigger scale, get a couple of rand from the next person. So therefore, humiliation in the Mishnah is not deemed the same way. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's unequal, the payment in terms of humiliation, depending on your social status. When we're saying, if you have a look at Rabbi Meir, it says we view them as though they are aristocrats who lost their wealth, for they are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What does this mean? Is that we don't assess the humiliation of a poor person according to his poverty, because it would be too lenient for the assailant, because we'd say, listen, he's used to being embarrassed. People often insult him. So therefore, that would pay virtually no humiliation fee, or very little. Nor do we assess the humiliation of a rich person according to his wealth. Why? Because, guys, as the Gemara says, there would be no end as to what such a victim could claim. Because he'd say, do you know, I am politically, this has ruined my career. I'm earning $1 million a year from my career. Now you've cost me 12 years. In other words, it would get extreme. So it's saying very cleverly, as Rabbi Meir says, all people, even the wealthy, are assessed as though they had once material wealth, then they lost it. In other words, we have to be sensitive to the fact that they're not used to being humiliated. So that's the middle course, guys. So it doesn't pay too much or doesn't pay too little. And since all Jews are the children of the holy patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they're all treated equally. Now, if you think about it, Rabbi Meir has got quite a progressive view. That's the way we see things today. which was quite unusual in those days. So that clearly doesn't accord with the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says, listen, social standing makes a difference. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, the eminent person is paid according to his eminence, and the lowly person is paid according to his lowliness. So what does that actually mean? Is that Rabbi Yehuda holds that we do consider the victim's financial status when assessing the payment for humiliation. So accordingly, if the assailant's liability is less when the victim is poor and greater when he is rich. So that seems so far to be exactly according to the Mishnah. So he's saying, well, how come? There's obviously something in his statement that's a little bit different, because it sounds so far pretty much like the Mishnah. But we're saying that Rabbi Shimon is according to the Mishnah, because he says, with regard to rich people, we view them as though they are free men who lost their wealth. What does that mean? It means that he actually, Rabbi Shimon, agrees with Rabbi Meir on that point, that you can't make them judged as being too poor, because then there's hardly a fee for humiliation. It's negligible. Okay? And we regard poor people like the least among them, meaning that we view all poor people like they're the most downtrodden of the poor, who are the least prone to experience humiliation. So what does that mean? Basically, guys, on that point, it means that Rabbi Shimon is arguing with Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says every person should be treated equally, and Rabbi Shimon is saying it's the most lenient. In other words, even rich people we deem as though they've lost their wealth. So they are prone to humiliation, but certainly not what a rich person would. And the poor people are treated like the downtrodden, the dregs of the dregs socially. Therefore, they get hardly anything. So in other words, the assailant here, according to Rabbi Shimon, pays the least amount of money, both for the rich and the poor. Okay. Whereas it's a little bit different as far as Rav Yehuda is concerned, because he's saying there's a disparaging difference between the rich and the poor. Okay. So now the Gemara explains how it actually accords with Rabbi Shimon, because in a way it seems like it goes more with Rabbi Yehuda. Because obviously it can't be according to Rabbi Meir. He's quite progressive. He said everybody is paid for humiliation. It's like across the board, all children of Avram. But our Mishnah taught it is all according to the status of the humiliator and humiliated. And Rabbi Meir says everybody is assessed together. And since everybody is assessed together, then in that particular case, the individual financial positions are not even considered. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, you might want to say that maybe it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Kevin, what does Rabbi Yehuda say?
About what? About the
Okay, you've got three opinions. You've got Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda. What do they say, Gav? What's each of their opinions?
I've read it over. I can't give it over.
No, that's okay.
Been through the material that I don't remember.
It's not an issue. It's not an issue, Gavin. What's all right, guys? What does Rabbi Meir say? He's the most progressive. I'll give you a clue.
What he says is that. Okay,
there we go. You go ahead.
Okay, so I'll take it. Most good says that if he's the most progressive one, that the rich and the poor doesn't make a difference; they're paid the same.
Exactly, because we're all children of Abraham, and therefore Jews are Jews. Why should we penalize the poor or indulge or ingratiate ourselves before the rich? Yeah, we're all children of Abraham. Excellent. And what does Rabbi Yehuda say?
So he says, so it's not exactly that. So the poor get according to their status. Well, everybody gets according to their status. So the humiliation is based on their status. as
Um,
opposed to being based on being a free man and everybody's equal.
exactly, exactly. So each person is, exactly as Gavin said, is paid according to the eminence. So eminence means your social standing. It's not just finances. Your finances are based on your social standing. The rich get a huge settlement for being humiliated, and the poor get hardly anything. Fine. Then you've got the most lenient opinion, which is Rabbi Shimon, who says it's very similar to Rabbi Yehuda, but there is a difference. What's the opinion of? The most lenient in terms of what the assailant has to pay.
They'll. I have no idea.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Folding clothes.
So
Folding
no,
clothes,
that's
yeah.
okay. So Rabbi Shimon says, look, we cannot judge rich people like what they think they're worth because it's going to get out of proportion. So what we do is we see them as being rich, having lost their wealth. So they're not used to embarrassment. So they're entitled to a fee for humiliation, but not like a rich person values themselves. Somebody that's middle class, that was rich and would feel embarrassment, but you can't make these astronomical claims in terms of humiliation. It's very conservative, which means it's not a fortune that the assailant would have to pay. Now, as far as the poor people, it says we pay them like the lowest of the low, meaning we hardly pay anything. So he's the most lenient to the assailant. So, according to Rabbi Shimon, the assailant pays the least amount under his rules. Okay. So, how does our Mishnah accord? Well, for our Mishnah teachers, one who humiliates a blind man is liable. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says in a brisa, a blind person has no humiliation. Rather, is it not that our Mishnah is following the view of Rabbi Shimon? Because again, the Gemara is saying one who humiliates a blind man is liable, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says a person that's blind has no humiliation. So it seems that it could have accorded with Rabbi Yehuda, similar to Rabbi Shimon with regards to the Mishnah, except for one thing. Mishnah says there's liability for humiliating a blind man, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says there's none. So the Gemara says no, that can't be. You've got to amend it a bit because it actually can accord with Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda says that a blind man has no humiliation when he's humiliating others. But if you humiliate him, we certainly give him compensation. That's the issue because he doesn't know what he's doing. A blind person, if he humiliates somebody else, you can't take it in the same light. He might not even be aware of what he's doing because he can't even be an aid. So one of the issues, by the way, that's going to come up is that if a blind person cannot be a witness, right, according to the rules of Adam Zimmerman, then you can't prosecute him because what you want to do to a blind person, he's not an eligible witness, so therefore he's not an eligible defendant either. So we're saying on that basis he's not liable. So we're saying that the Mishnah can accord with Rabbi Yehuda because it doesn't say that there's no humiliation when you embarrass a blind person. It just means when the blind person humiliates somebody else, he's not liable. That's the implication. Now the Gemara says, hang on a second, if you want to look at it, maybe you can compare it to one who humiliates a sleeping person is liable, but a sleeping person who humiliates another person is not liable. Because we're saying when somebody's asleep, if he does something to you that's humiliating, that all of a sudden he doesn't know he's asleep and he thinks he's in the bathroom and he urinates on you. He urinates on you because he's sleepwalking. You cannot sue him for humiliation because it's not a person that's cognitively conscious. But if you humiliate a sleeping person, but when he's sleeping, take photographs of him with shaving cream and his finger up his nose, that is embarrassing. So therefore you pay if you humiliate a sleeping person. And it wants to say, maybe it's the same with the blind person. He's like a sleeping person. So the Gemara says, no, it's not true. Because it's saying at the end of the day, it's a little bit more complicated than that. A blind person collects money if he is humiliated, and according to many opinions, he pays if you humiliate somebody else. So it's not all opinions that a blind person is indemnified for embarrassing others. He is liable. He is liable, according to many opinions. So you cannot compare it to a sleeping person. Rather, the clear understanding is that our mission is followed only with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Okay? Which means Rav Yehuda, the minute Rav Yehuda is saying that there's no humiliation for a blind person, if he embarrasses others, it's not true, because not all opinions hold by that. And therefore, if he differs with the Mishnah on that accord, the only opinion that is more consistent, because Rabbi Shimon agrees with, as far as that's concerned, that a blind person that humiliates or is humiliated has to either pay or be paid. And therefore, they don't have that bone of contention. And as far as their opinion in terms of eminence, it definitely holds that a person of higher political and financial esteem is eligible to more payments than a poor person that's used to be insulted when he begs on the street. So
I think in today's day and age, I'm not so sure the higher up you go, the better the quality of person at all.
well, it wasn't actually saying that at all, Gavin. It's a great point. It's not saying that. It's saying that when, for example, I'll give you an example. This Finland prime minister was caught recently thrusting herself at a party, and
Yes, I saw that.
it's almost
Quite
ruined her
hot.
career because she's quite hot, and
Yeah.
she acted very differently in public with decorum compared to how she embarrassed herself, because that's not the sort of persona that a prime minister should give. It should be
Unbecoming.
decorum and dignity, and therefore we're not saying that it's a better human being. He's saying that the amount of damage to their earning potential differs. In other words, if somebody's correcting money at a robot and the person says, nah, go get a job, say you'll collect from the next cop. Okay, doesn't affect him as much, it's not great. So it's saying that humiliation has to do with how it's going to damage your earning potential, not what a person is worth. And that's the fact of consideration. How do these things cost an individual from earning? Makes sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Because it bothered me too. I looked into it. Yeah, and listen, the bottom line of politics is that you got to assume any video you make is going to come out with social media today. How she could be so stupid, I don't know.
Yes, correct.
Really,
Absolutely. It's the
really
same with all these people that were bust with wearing masks in the Democratic Party
Yeah.
at all these events, and they were bust because
Hypocritical.
there's always going to be somebody who doesn't dig them, and they're going to take it on. Everybody's got cameras today. Exactly what Damon's saying. Wherever you are, it could land up on social, especially if you're a high-profile person.
There's one thing I want to say about Donald Trump, by the way. I agree with his economic policies. I agree with his most